Welcome to Passion for Sound, the channel dedicated to thorough and honest reviews of headphones, earphones, DACs, headphone amps, other components and accessories. Basically everything audio related except power amps and passive speakers. My name's Lachlan and my goal is to explore and discuss all kinds of audio topics, even the controversial ones, to help us all find more enjoyment from music. Thanks for watching and enjoy the video. Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review. And as you can see from the array of bits and pieces in front of me, I've got a multi-product review today, and this time it's budget active noise cancelling wireless headphones. Before I get into the review, I do want to cover off just a couple of things. Firstly, I've still got the giveaway going on for the Samsung Galaxy Buds Live earbuds. If you want to be a part of that, make sure you go and check out either the HE400 SE review, my comparison review of the Sol S-Fit and Moondrop Sparks review, or of course the Matrix Mini Eye Pro 3 review. So any of those have all the details you need, and you can enter by commenting on those videos. And of course, make sure you're subscribed. So make sure you go and check out any one of those videos if you want to be a part of the giveaway. I'll be drawing it in the next 1 or 2 videos once I've had a chance to see entries from the Matrix Mini Eye Pro 3 video. So do stay tuned, make sure you're subscribed, and good luck to everybody entering. Now to introduce today's review, I've got here in front of me 4 budget active noise cancelling wireless headphones. They are all less than or at $150 in price, and they all offer different levels of build quality, functionality, and of course sound quality. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to step through each of them, introduce each of them one by one, starting from the cheapest to the most expensive, and then I'm going to talk about how they sound in comparison to one another. A couple of things that I'm not going to go into detail on is that they've all got good battery life, so I'm not going to break that down in detail. They've also all got USB-C charging, so that's not really an issue to separate them with. And when it comes to testing, all testing was done using the best possible codec from my Samsung Galaxy S21 Ultra, and wide testing from the iBasso DX300. My final rankings as to which of these I think are best in terms of sound quality is based entirely on with active noise cancelling switched on, because as you'll hear, the sound quality of these does vary significantly in some cases, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, when active noise cancelling switched on. So all of my sound quality recommendations, comments, suggestions, etc. will be based on active noise cancelling on, but I'll tell you about the differences between having it on and off for each headphone. Before I get into the review, I should mention that because I'm going to go into a little bit of depth on each headphone before I get to the comparison, you may want to use the chapter markers below. If there's just a particular headphone here that you would like to see reviewed, you can jump straight to that headphone, and then of course move into the comparisons afterwards. So if there's anything here you're not interested in, don't bother watching it, just jump forwards to the next chapter that takes your fancy. With all that out of the way, let's start with the cheapest headphone in the bunch, the OneOdio A30. OneOdio are known for their budget headphones now. I reviewed their Pro 50 wide headphone some time ago, and whilst it's definitely a budget headphone in terms of performance, it's a very good budget headphone in terms of performance. So I was curious to see if the A30 had a similar level of quality. The A30 here retails for $70 or about 95 Australian dollars, and that makes it incredibly good value in the world of active noise cancelling wireless headphones. Of course, it needs to be well enough built to handle day-to-day use and also sound good for it to be worthwhile, but that's what we're here to talk about. The A30 comes with this kind of synthetic leather case and the cables that you need to connect it up, both a USB-C cable and also a 3.5 to 3.5mm cable for wired use. It uses the Bluetooth 5.0 codec, and therefore latency when watching videos or playing games is very good. I didn't get any sense of lag or fall behind of the audio compared to what was happening on the screen. Something else that's a bit unique about the A30 is that it does have a toggle switch for the active noise cancelling circuit. So there's a toggle switch here on the right ear cup, just there, that you can switch on anytime you like. And what I mean by that is you can switch on active noise cancelling even when the Bluetooth is switched off. Now that's both good and bad. If you wanted to sit, say, in a noisy environment and just have peace and quiet, you can switch on active noise cancelling without having the transmission happening from the Bluetooth. I'm assuming that means you're not going to be draining the battery as much. For those of you that are concerned about having a Bluetooth radio transmitter next to your head all the time, it also means you can enjoy active noise cancelling without the Bluetooth transmission against your head. There is one drawback to that design though, and that is that it's very possible, and I've done it a few times myself, to accidentally leave the active noise cancelling circuit on when you've finished with the headphone. So it's a bit of a gripe that I have with the A30 is that you do have to manually consider the status of the active noise cancelling circuit. You can't just leave it on and have it come on and off with the Bluetooth circuit. On the flip side, a really cool thing about that is that you can use the A30 wired with active noise cancelling, and I don't think I've ever seen that in a headphone before. There could well be headphones out there that do it, I just haven't come across them. So just to clarify what I mean, you can plug the A30 into your high quality portable DAC, DAP, whatever it might be, just out of your phone of course if you want to, and you can have active noise cancelling as well as the benefits of wired quality audio. So that's really, really cool that it does that. I should mention at this point as well that unless I specify otherwise, all of these headphones are using generic codecs such as SBC or AAC. When a headphone in this lineup does have things like aptX HD or LDAC, I'll make sure to call it out. But otherwise, assume it's using SBC or ACC, as is the case with the A30. Before we talk about sound quality, I do want to mention the build quality of the A30. For a budget $70 headphone, it's pretty good. It's a little bit kind of creaky, as you can probably hear, but it's not too bad all in all. It's more just the noise of the plastic joints moving against one another rather than any particular strain or anything I'd be concerned about. You've got decent padding in the headband that's relatively firm, which is a good thing because it means you're less likely to bottom out on the core, like the structural part of the headband. It's got nice deep pads, not a huge opening, but good enough. And all in all, I found it pretty comfortable. It extends fairly well, so those with larger heads should be pretty okay. Maybe not the very biggest heads, but most people should be alright with this. So I'd rate the build quality from the A30 as above what I would expect from a $70 headphone. It doesn't feel premium, but it definitely feels better than the cheapest of the bunch that I've got here in front of me. And so now with that out of the way, let's talk sound. And I have to cover 4 different variants of the sound from the A30. First off, we've got wired with no active noise cancelling enabled. In that configuration, the A30 is a pretty neutral sounding headphone. It's a little bit light in bass and bass extension, and it means that also then the treble comes a bit forward and it's a little bit overdone in the treble. Some people might really appreciate that because it is what is often considered a more neutral sound, but to me it lacks a little bit of realism and kind of engagement and soul because of the lacking bass. Switching on the ANC circuit makes a significant difference. So we're still talking wired here, but with ANC active. And the moment you switch that ANC switch on, the bass fills out, the treble gets tamed a little bit, and overall it becomes what I would consider a very good budget wired headphone. Now, of course, you have to be comfortable with the fact that it's also applying noise cancelling in order to get those benefits. But if you are, it's a really nice headphone for $70. It's not going to knock off for me using something like an ATH M50X or a Meza 99 Neo, even though they haven't got noise cancelling. So it's not at the stage where I'd say it's better than those in terms of sound quality, but it is a very good headphone, and the fact that it's so versatile with the active noise cancelling available as well as the wireless available makes it a really interesting option. But before we stop there, let's talk about the Bluetooth capabilities with noise cancelling on and noise cancelling off. The sound from the Bluetooth circuit of the A30 without noise cancelling switched on is fairly reminiscent of its wired sound quality without noise cancelling switched on. But in this case, I do think it's marginally better. So the internal amplifier and the Bluetooth transmission process is obviously altering the sound a little bit, and it's making it just a little bit less lean and neutral than it was with the wire. And when I say lean and neutral, I probably should say cold and analytical in some ways. It did lack weight in the wired setup without noise cancelling. The Bluetooth brings a little bit more weight to the sound that I do appreciate, but I would still like just a little bit more. The sound can get a bit weightless and ethereal, and the treble can still get a bit fatiguing in Bluetooth mode without noise cancelling. Overall though, in that setup or that configuration, it is a better and quite well balanced overall tonality of headphone. So finally, let's talk about Bluetooth and active noise cancelling working together. What you get then is a headphone that is suddenly quite boomy and bassy. It's probably a little bit overdone in the bass, even for my taste, and I enjoy bass. The bass also bleeds up into the mids and makes it a little bit muddy through the mid-range. On the flip side, the weight in each note and each sound is much better, and the treble is much better controlled with Bluetooth and active noise cancelling switched on. So with Bluetooth and active noise cancelling working together on the A30, I describe it as an overall warm, bassy headphone that's quite good but lacking in a little bit of refinement. It's enjoyable, it's easy to listen to, but it's not a really hi-fi experience in the way that some of you might be looking for. And so with that in mind, let's move now to our next least expensive headphone, and remember that we're going to come back around and compare them all and rank them all at the end. For now though, it's on to the Soundpeats A6. Now these are a little bit unique, and I should have actually put them first in the review because they are actually cheaper than the A30. So apologies for my error there, I got a bit mixed up with the pricing. These retail at 73 Australian dollars, which equates to 55 US dollars, so 15 US dollars cheaper than the A30. The reason these are a bit unique is because they're only available in Australia. And that's why I've got the Australian dollar price as my primary price, and also why I made the error of thinking these were more than the A30. But the A30 is 70 US dollars, these are 73 Australian dollars. So these are a cheaper headphone. So apologies for the error, and for anybody outside of Australia, I'm not entirely sure if these are able to be shipped by Amazon Australia to non-Australian locations. But I'll put a link down below, and you're welcome to check it out if you like the sound of what I've got to say here. The Soundpeats come with a velvet style pouch for your headphones, as well as the normal connection cables 3.5 to 3.5mm and a USB-C for charging. Their build quality is probably on par, maybe slightly cheaper feeling than the A30s, but generally they're doing a decent enough job. Again, we've got some decent padding on top that's relatively firm. We've got a more oval style opening in the ear pads, but again, good padding and only modest sizing though. So that is something to be aware of, is that you may be concerned about these if you have larger ears. Headband size, again, good enough for most large heads. And all in all, they're a nice looking, decent enough headphone. The Soundpeats A6 do have fast charging, which not all of these models do, so again, this is something I'll call out if it's been mentioned and if it's there, so it's nice that you can get a quick charge with the A6. Like the A30, the Soundpeats A6 are also using Bluetooth 5.0, and therefore again, you've got very low lag or latency. When it comes to noise cancelling on the A6, instead of a switch, these have got a toggle button to switch noise cancelling on and off, and it is tied to whether or not the Bluetooth circuit is on. So these will only work with active noise cancelling when used in wireless mode. And that's common and normal for most of the headphones around. The A30 are really a standout in not doing it that way. So now let's talk about the sound of the A6 in wired connectivity. These are an interesting sound in the sense that they're quite a warm sounding headphone when used wired, but they're lacking in bass. And so what I mean by that is that there's a lot of emphasis in the mid-range and the upper registers of the bass before it drops away in the lower levels of the bass and leaves an overall warm and slightly thick sound. The treble has a metallic and a slightly thin quality to it, and so the combination of that little bit of thickness through the mid-range and the tinniness and metallic qualities of the treble mean that as a wired headphone, I consider these pretty average, and I really wouldn't recommend them for use that way. Switching to Bluetooth without noise cancelling switched on, and the sound quality changes fairly significantly. Now we've got a richer, deeper bass, and the overall sound, while still leaning warm, is much fuller and more extended and more kind of complete, I guess you'd say. The sound is still a little bit congested, but the treble quality has been improved. And so using these as a wired headphone without active noise cancelling, they can be quite an enjoyable listen. I've described their sound in my notes as decent, but not great when using wireless without active noise cancelling. Keeping in mind their crazy cheap price though, and they're certainly not something you should overlook. If you're just looking for a headphone for basic everyday use, let's say you're listening to podcasts, audiobooks, or just some background music, they're absolutely good enough for those sorts of purposes. If you're looking for an audiophile experience without active noise cancelling switched on, then they're probably not the best choice. But before we jump to any conclusions, let's talk about the combination now of Bluetooth and active noise cancelling. That once again changes the sound fairly significantly from the A6, and the result you get is a much more neutral tuning. the bass gets pulled right back, the mid-range and the treble are both massively improved, and all of a sudden they become quite a neutral and good sounding headphone. They're not the most engaging listen because the bass has been tamed fairly significantly by the wireless and active noise cancelling combo, but the result is a more spacious, more detailed and resolving sounding headphone. So when using the configuration of both circuits running, that being Bluetooth and noise cancelling, I'd describe these as not the most engaging, but a very good sounding headphone overall. And indeed for 73 Australian dollars, 55 US dollars if you can get them in the US, at that price, these are actually pretty compelling. Again, they're not a full-on audiophile experience, but at the price you're paying, they're very, very good. And so with all that said, let's park the A6 ready for our comparison coming up soon and move on to the next least expensive headphone here in the Eoz Arc. I've reviewed the Eoz Arc in detail here on the channel, so you can check out my review of the Arcs with a card or place at the end of this video. For now though, let's give you a quick rundown and recap of the Eoz Arc. These retail for 139 US dollars or 186 Australian dollars. They're, as you can see, made of metal, and that makes them very unique in this sort of price category. In fact, very unique overall. You don't see very many wireless headphones made entirely out of metal like this. Now I say entirely, there are plastic parts used, there's also of course the headbands and the padding, so it's not like they're a solid metal headphone, but there is a lot of metal used in the headband and the outside of the cups. The Arc offer, like all the others, a fabric pouch with the normal cables and connectors, so again 3.5mm to 3.5mm and a USB-C charging cable. They differ in a few other ways though, in that whilst they're using Bluetooth 5.0, they do support the aptX HD codec. And so in theory, that should give them a massive edge in terms of the resolution and detail you can get through the wireless circuit. Something else that the Arcs boast are a set of graphene drivers, which in theory should make for a cleaner, punchier and more articulate sound. Once again, we do have a toggle switch for the active noise cancelling circuit, which is on this cup in this case, and that one is either on or off and is tied once again to the Bluetooth wireless circuit. In terms of comfort, these are a bit of a different sort of headphone. They are light, the padding is decent, although it's quite soft on top of the head, which for some people may cause some issues potentially. But where things get quite different is that it doesn't seal strongly against the side of the head. When the headphone's on your ears, it feels like there's a break in the seal in a lot of the padding. Having said that, it doesn't seem to affect the sound quality overly. There's still decent bass, as I'm going to talk about shortly, but it may be disconcerting to some people when they first put these on to feel like they're not snugging onto the head in the way that all of these others tend to do. All in all though, I think the Eoz Arc are a striking and unique design that's perfectly functional and fairly comfortable. Something I haven't covered off on the other two, because to be honest I kind of take it for granted until I get to something like this, is that the other headphones here all fold up into a compact form, whereas the Arcs don't. There's no folding here, what you see is what you get. If you reduce the size of the cups on the headband, you've still got the pins of the headband sticking out the bottom. So this is as small as they get, and therefore you're going to be carrying a full-sized headphone, albeit a compact full-size headphone, around in your bag. But let's talk now about sound quality. The Eoz Arc are a decent sounding wired headphone, but overall there's a nasality to their tone and the bass is a little bit lacking. And it's worth being aware as you start to hear me say fairly mediocre things about all of these in their wired setups. It's worth noting that most of the headphone manufacturers making wireless headphones are using DSP and EQ as part of the Bluetooth circuit to help tune the drivers in their headphones. So unlike a traditional driver in a wired headphone that is not a wireless headphone as well, in a fully wired headphone, normally there's a lot of tuning done in terms of damping the driver, selecting the driver very carefully to suit the housing, the way it's mounted in the headphones very carefully decided on. All of those things are normally used to acoustically tune a fully wired headphone. Because of the capabilities of the Bluetooth chips used in all of these, that sort of tuning is being done through DSP and EQ. And that's why all of these tend to be pretty mediocre choices as a pure wired headphone. One exception to this rule that I've reviewed in recent times is the Drop Panda, which was acoustically tuned separate from the Bluetooth circuit. But in the case of all of these, they're being tuned through the Bluetooth, and that's why you get very varied results when listening to them wired. So recognizing that the Eoz Arc is pretty mediocre as a wired headphone, let's talk about it in wireless form. When using Bluetooth without noise cancelling, unfortunately the Eoz Arc is still fairly mediocre. There is slightly more bass brought into the mix, but the overall tonality still remains a bit nasal and not the most enjoying overall listen. When we switch on active noise cancelling, you get a significant shift in the sound. The soundstage becomes wider, but sounds also come closer to you, which is quite interesting. So it's like less depth, but more width in the soundstage. Not that it had particularly good layering without noise cancelling on, it was more that everything was just sitting further away from you in a flat line, whereas now with noise cancelling, it comes towards you but stays in that same sort of flat line. And that's pretty true for all of these. None of these have particularly good layering and depth. Back to just the Eoz Arc though, the other thing that's worth noting is that the treble does become quite bitey. So for those of you that love a detailed and sparkly treble, the Eoz Arc could be a really good choice. But for others, it can become fatiguing fairly quickly. Finally, we should talk about the bass, which becomes much punchier and snappier when noise cancelling is switched on. So you get more fullness and richness to the bass, as well as a good sense of speed and punch. Overall, without getting into deep comparisons here, what I found was the Eoz Arc was a more engaging listen than something like the Soundpeats A6, but at the same time could lean much quicker into fatigue from the treble. So it's going to be a very personal preference as to whether or not you like the presentation of the Eoz Arc. They're a good headphone, they're very detailed and resolving thanks to the aptX HD, but they could go just a little bit too far for some people. So now let's come around to our most expensive, but still very affordable wireless active noise cancelling headphone in the Avantree Aria Me headphone. Now this is particularly unique in this lineup for many reasons. Before I explain why, let me tell you that it's a $150 headphone, and so it is stepping up a long way from something like the $70 A30 or the $55 73 Australian dollar Soundpeats A6. At double the price of something like the A30, or more than double the price, what you're getting is a whole lot more for your money, at least in terms of features and accessories. We'll talk about sound soon. The headphone itself is fairly normal to look at. It feels and looks like most of the others. It's plastic of build. It's got a decent sized oval shape ear cup. The quality of materials feels okay, probably slightly better than the other two plastic models, and of course different to the metal option in the Eoz Arc. The expansion of the headband is good. It folds up nice and compact like the other plastic models do, so everything there is pretty normal. I'll talk more about the specific features in terms of Bluetooth capabilities, active noise cancelling in a moment, but before we do, let me show you what is so unique about the Avantree Aria Me. The first thing you probably already noticed is it was sitting on a headphone stand, whereas the others weren't. That wasn't because I chose to favour the Avantree Aria Me, it's because it comes with this stand. Not only does it come with a stand, but if you can see up here, there are contacts on the stand, which means this is a charging stand. You can plug a USB-C cable into the back of the stand here, and every time you're finished with your Aria Me's, you pop them on the stand and they're charging. That to me is really cool for it to come in a package for $150. So you're paying a fraction more than you're paying for the Eoz Arc, and you're getting a charging stand, you're getting the headphones, but, and I'm going to sound like a telly salesperson here, which is not my intention, there is more. No, it's not steak knives. What you're also getting is a hard case, so this is the only one with a hard case. You're of course getting cables like 3.5mm to 3.5mm and USB-C charging, but yes, there is actually more, and I've done that case up instead of undoing it. What you're also getting is a boom mic. So this boom mic plugs into the socket at the base of the headphone that's normally used for sound to come in, and it gives you a microphone option to use for voice calls, recording, gaming, all that sort of stuff. So this is an incredibly well-featured headphone for a $150 device. While we're talking features, in addition to the accessories, I should mention it's also Bluetooth 5.0, but it also, like the Arc, gives you aptX HD. It also has a toggle switch for active noise cancelling, which again is tied entirely to the Bluetooth circuit, so the A30 remains the only headphone here that has an isolated noise cancelling circuit that can be on or off with wired or with no signal at all. In addition to being aptX HD and having the noise cancelling like all of them do, the other things that the Aria Me have going for it are that it's got a few more control buttons, so it's going to be easier to control your playback or your voice calls with the Aria Me. You don't have to remember random numbers of presses of buttons, so 3 presses for this and 2 presses for that. It's going to be much easier with the Aria Me. Another little feature that I like, and it's a really small feature, but I think it's a great feature, is that the power switch on the Aria Me is set up in such a way that when you switch the Aria Me on, a simple switch will take it to power on mode, but you can also press it further than the on position into pairing mode. So it's sort of like a sprung switch when you go beyond the on position, and that's going to activate the pairing mode for Bluetooth, which is a really, really cool feature and makes pairing really simple if you get a new phone, if you want to connect it up to a computer as well as your phone. Every time you need to pair it, it's a much simpler activation. As I said, it's a really minor detail. It's not a reason to buy these over anything else, but I think it's a really smart feature and I wanted to mention it. Finally, before we talk about the sound, but in something that is related to the sound, the Aria Me also has its very own sound calibration system. So there's an app you can download that's made by Avantree or for Avantree, it's branded Avantree, and that's going to allow you to go through a series of tests and identify your threshold for being able to hear each tone. Once you go through those series of tests, it's going to spit out a sound calibration that is meant to adjust the sound of the Aria Me to suit your personal hearing. Now, I've got a minor issue with the app in the sense that I couldn't actually get below the threshold on some tones, particularly the bass tones, whereas other higher frequencies, the threshold was much, much higher for me. I do have some degree of hearing loss, as we all do, but I get the sense that it's not a particularly accurate app based on what I know of my own hearing loss and what I was hearing from the Aria Me. I think the range needed to be bigger to allow me to really get to my threshold on every single frequency. On top of that, it's not entirely clear to me what the target curve is for the Aria Me, and this is often the case with calibration profiles. It's fine that it's working out what your hearing is, but that doesn't necessarily mean that their target curve is going to be to your liking. So the changes it makes may actually move it further away from your preferred sound because they've got their own target curve they're aiming for. Maybe it's a V-shaped curve, maybe it's a bass lift and a treble drop curve, who knows? It's all about what they think is the right sound, and that may or may not be to your tastes, regardless of your hearing capabilities. On the flip side, you can fiddle around with the Avantree app and kind of turn it into a custom EQ if you just sort of ignore what it's doing for your hearing and instead tell it which frequencies you want to be boosted by putting your threshold higher or lower. So if you're willing to fiddle around with it, you can think of these as having an EQ, albeit a pretty clumsy and non-transparent one, because you've got to kind of guess at what's going to be right for you. You can't hear it live in the moment. With all that out of the way, let's talk about the sound quality though of the Avantree Aria Me. In its wide setup, of course with no active noise cancelling or anything switched on, the sound's okay, but it's a little bit boxy and a little bit boomy. The bass is just a touch overdone, I think, from the Aria Me in their wide form. So as you probably gathered by now, none of these in their wide form are particularly good headphones. The A30 might come closest in wide form to what I would say is decent, but in all of them, they're not quite ideal. So realistically, the only time I'd be recommending that you use these wired is if you're in a situation where you've run out of battery and you really want sound. Otherwise, they're all best in their wireless setup. And so moving to the Aria Me in a wireless setup, with no active noise cancelling on, the sound does improve from wired mode, but it is still a touch boxy. The bass is better controlled though, so some of the boominess and the over-enhancement of the bass has been tamed a little bit. I describe the sound in wireless but non-active noise cancelling mode as being good overall sound for a budget wireless headphone. It doesn't compete with more expensive wireless headphones, but at a budget level it's quite acceptable. I should mention, by the way, that with the initial comments I'm making here, I hadn't applied any calibration. So what I've just described to you with the wireless on and active noise cancelling off is with no calibration applied. We'll get to the calibration in a minute. Before we do though, let's talk about wireless mode with noise cancelling but no calibration. In that setup, the bass was massively tamed, perhaps a little bit too far, and the boxiness was taken away from the mids. So overall, the sound was a lot better, and it's quite a good sounding headphone. It might just be a little bit too far gone in the bass, and therefore note weight does get a little bit light, but it's pretty good all in all and hard to complain about, particularly at the price. One thing I particularly did notice with both wireless and noise cancelling active was that the soundstage and separation in the Aria Me became quite strong, and again this is with no calibration applied. Once I applied the calibration, so now we've got wireless, noise cancelling and calibration, the sound was the best I'd heard from the Aria Me. I would have preferred just a little bit more bass still, but it was a good overall sound. The tonal balance was improved by that little bit of extra bass coming in and balancing out the slight thinness that I was hearing without the calibration. And whilst I still would have liked a little bit more bass, it is something that, as I said before, you can trick it into doing if you just adjust your responses in the calibration app. So all in all, where I found myself rating the Avantree was as a good overall budget headphone that is still lacking in a bit of refinement compared to more expensive options like, say, a Drop Panda or something like a Neurophone, even something like a Sony 1000 XM3. I haven't heard the 4 yet. So it's not quite as refined as some of those, but tonality wise, it might be preferable to some of those because I know some people don't like the bass in the Sony models, and that's where the Aria Me is much more polite and much better tamed. So at this point, all of these headphones to me represent decent enough sound quality. Some are better than others, none of them reach the heights of more expensive wireless headphones. But if we're going to put them into some sort of ranking, let me talk you through that and explain my reasoning. First of all, I want to make it clear that, to me, they're all built well enough for what I expect at the price point. I'd be very happy with any of these from a build quality point of view, and I'd have no concerns about long-term usability and stability of their design. Of course, things like whether or not a headphone collapses into a more compact form is going to be something that you need to take into account for your own use case. But beyond that, I'm not separating any of these on features or on build quality because I think they're all fairly comparable. Obviously, the Avantree Aria Me offers way more for your money with the charging stand, the hard case, the boom mic. All of that might, for you, put them over the top. But I'm not using that as part of my factoring into my ranking that I'm about to give you. The ranking is based entirely on their sound quality with their maximum capabilities, I guess, in play. So what that means is active noise cancelling on, wireless on, and in the case of the Aria Me, the calibration applied. Because the reality is, that's the maximum performance capabilities of each of these headphones. And with that in mind, the way I've rated them is as follows. I found the Eoz Arc to be my least favourite of this entire challenge. Even though it's the second most expensive headphone here, I think it has a few flaws. The bass is very, very good from these when active noise cancelling and wireless mode are both active. But to me, the treble just gets a bit too forceful and it does lead to fatigue for me. And that's what puts these at the bottom of the lot of this set of 4 headphones. Moving up, things get a little bit more tricky. In one version of my rankings, the next headphone I put in was the Avantree Aria Me. So I had that third. But I'm going to hold that off because with playing around with the calibration, I'm going to change my opinion on that one. So instead, my next choice in this option is the Soundpeats A6. The reason I put this here is for one thing and one thing only, and that is that I found the bass just a little bit overdone compared to the next headphone up in the chain. They're a very, very good headphone for $55 US, 73 Australian dollars. They're incredibly good at that price, but they just don't quite match up in terms of the refinement, particularly in the bass, to the other 2 headphones above. The next headphone that is above is the A30 from OneOdio. So as you can now tell, as I played around with things, the Aria Me eventually leapfrogged the A30s when I played with the calibration. But it's a really close call. I would very comfortably choose the A30 overall if it weren't for the ability to tweak and adjust the sound of the Aria Me using that calibration app. The A30 is still a bit unrefined, it's still a cheap headphone. And in some ways, I think the build quality is potentially the worst of the lot in some ways. In other ways, it's maybe on par with the A6 from Soundpeats, but it's still, to me, the most balanced and neutral sounding headphone of all the options here. And when I say balanced and neutral, that's probably the wrong term. It's the most engaging, realistic, and lifelike headphone while still being unrefined in some ways. It's got a little bit of punch in the bass, but it doesn't get too punchy like something like the A6. It's got decent treble detail, but it doesn't get fatiguing like the Eoz Arc. And so overall, this is the headphone, the A30, that gives you the best overall tonal balance and timbral accuracy, short of the Aria Me after some tweaking. The other thing that gets the A30 the nod is the fact, and I said I wasn't going to separate these on features, so this is a bonus, it's not a reason for my ranking, it's just an extra throw in. The fact that you can switch on active noise cancelling when using it wired and make it probably the best wired sound sounding of this entire bunch. So that's why the A30 comes in at a very strong second and almost even a tie for first place with the Aria Me. The Aria Me, without playing around with the calibration, I did find to be just a little bit forced through the mids and treble, and that was originally why I had it third out of these 4 in my initial rankings. I also wish that it had a little bit more bass, which would have also helped to balance off the slightly forward mids and treble, and so in playing around with the app, fiddling around, and instead of answering accurately to my hearing, I answered based on what I wanted more or less of from the headphone, and then the results that I got were much more to my liking. Once I tweaked the calibration in that way, for me the Aria Me gave me the best possible sound quality out of these 4. That's partly down to the fact that it's got aptX HD and therefore gives you a better level of resolution, but also because it's got an overall level of refinement to the sound that I think is better than any of these others. And so at the end of all these comparisons, testing, back and forth, what I can tell you is that I think any of these are completely fine. I think if you bought any of them at the price you're paying, they're really not going to disappoint too badly. The Eoz Arc is probably the most problematic of this lot in the sense that you should only buy them if you really enjoy a bright, sparkly treble and a nice punchy bass. If the treble is something that you shy away from, you should also shy away from the Arc. But do keep in mind, out of this 4, the Arc and the Aria Me are the only 2 options with aptX HD. And that might be a key factor for you. Beyond that, I'd say that all of them offer a level of quality that is very good for the price, but is not at the level of more expensive headphones, such as the Sony. Bose maybe not, I'm not a huge fan of the Bose based on the sample one that I heard and reviewed some time ago, but some of the other active noise cancelling headphones on the market are clearly better than these at a much higher price. And so it all comes down to your priorities. So if you're in the market for a budget wireless headphone, I'll put links to all of these down below so you can choose which one suits you best. Once again, I don't know if the A6 here is able to be shipped outside of Australia. I know it's not on the non-Australian Amazon websites, but I'm not sure if you can ship it from Australia elsewhere. As for the others, there should be pretty global availability, so I'll put all of those links down in the description below. As always, if you found this review useful, I'd love it if you hit subscribe and the like button to help share this video with others like you. And also, of course, if you like this type of content, you want to keep seeing more and support the channel using any of the affiliate links down in the description below, or buying merchandise, or joining Patreon, any of those are great ways to help me keep making videos like this. There's quite a lot of work that goes into it, particularly when it's comparisons like this, and I deeply appreciate any and all support received. So thank you once again for watching, sharing, subscribing, commenting, all that good stuff. But for now, I'll leave it to the music, so happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.